Hi, what's up everyone and welcome to my new C++ video. In this video, I'm gonna cover preprocessor directives in all C++ code and will provide relevant examples for common used preprocessor directives in C++. And the first thing we should know about preprocessor directives in C++ that they usually start with hash sign in C++. This includes hash include, hash define, hash undef, ifdef, IfNdef, else, elif, endif, and pragma. And I'm gonna present relevant examples for each cases. And usually what happens here when we compile our C++ code, the preprocessor examines all directives before the code compilation. Remember, the preprocessor directives extend only across a single line of a code and they don't need semicolon at the end, and then you will see it through examples. Let's focus on these preprocessor directives and I'm gonna give you some relevant examples. The first case is hash include, and then how and where we use hash include. And basically when we want to include other files into our current file, for example other header files in our current source file, which we will have like many videos about this in future video series. And also when we want to include some sort of source file of or header files of libraries in our C++ code. And the format, they usually come with two formats in C++, and then I'm gonna show you what is the difference between these two formats. So let's create a block comments here, and the first one comes with hash include, which you include your file name inside of angle brackets, and the second one comes with hash include and you include your file name inside of your inside of quotation marks. And the difference between these two, I will explain it in and for you to understand what's the difference between these two includes. And then for the first case, when we use angle brackets to include file name, basically this format searches for the file in the standard include directories like standard C++ directory library, and also we could include standard directories that can be controlled using by user through compiler options. For example, in makefile we can give a directory to some sort of external libraries, and we could use this angle brackets to include file name. And for the second one, when we use quotation marks, basically we explicitly say that the compiler to search for the file name within where the current file exists, or you could do some sort of relative directory. So example of this would be, or you could do something like hash include and relative to current file one level up and file name, and or you could do something like include 2 levels up file name. So basically if you use this one, what happens first, C++ the compiler will look for the file name in the same directory. If it cannot find that file name, so it will search within the standard libraries, both internally and externally included standard libraries. And this is the main difference when you use hash include with angle brackets or quotation mark, and their difference how to search for file name within existing file or within standard libraries or external libraries. So let's give a simple example for this case. So usually we will use this hash include IO stream, basically standard C++ template libraries, and then so I'm gonna using namespace std here for some printing, and using namespace within IOStream, and then I'm gonna just print hello world here. So int main, and then bracket here, so cout and hello world endl. Okay, and then if we run this code, basically we use hash include here with angle brackets to call file name called IOStream, which is part of C++ standard libraries, a header file of that one. And then if you want to open it, just open it here, and then you see like this is standard IOStream, IOStream for C++. This is the header file for IOStream, and then we don't need to change it anything here. I'm just including the header file to use some features from this IOStream, and the reason why I'm using angle brackets here, because I'm searching for this file within standard C++ standard libraries. All right, but in future we will show some sort of examples how to include. So even in today's video, I'm gonna show you another example when we use quotation marks to include some sort of file name, so within this main file. Okay, if we run this case, and then we will have, of course, we will have the printed hello world on console. Okay, and that's it. This is very simple case when we use hash include, and also the main I'm gonna make a note here about hash include. When we use hash include to include files, we have to be careful about the inclusion of the same file in many source files when our code is complicated and there are many dependencies. And so we usually use option called header guards, which I'm gonna show you an example about the application of header guards, and then how when we include multiple file names, and to eliminate multiple call of the same file, and how we use this header guard to prevent this kind of duplications. All right. So this is basically the application for hash include. The next one, which I'm gonna talk about, it is replace directive. And basically, so the next one is I'm gonna create another command block here, and then basically we have hash define, so and hash undef here. So what happens, we use hash define directive to define the identifier as a macro, or instruct the compiler that, hey compiler, replace this identifier by this given replacement name or list. Okay, of course we can use hash define to define object-like macros, such as, so I will give you an example, such as, for example, a name or value, or function like macros, and which will do some kind of multiplication or summation or simple function, and then will return something to us. And so if we use a macro type, for the format for here, I'm gonna write it, the format for object type macros are, so basically we use hash define, and then we have identifier, and then we have replacement name. Okay, however, the format for function like macros is similar, but so you will see the slight difference between them. Basically, you have identifier, and then we can, so for function type, like a function, which we will have a separate video about functions in C++, so we can pass parameters. So for example, param1 and param2 and etc., and we can do something here, for example a plus b, and I will give you an example in, so here now, and then we will have replacement list here. So these are the format for object like macros and function like macros. So let me give you an example, but before this I'm also giving you something about an example, a format about Undef here. So whatever we define as an identifier, function or object, we can use Undef to undefine them. When we undefine them, we have to, if we want to use them again, the same name again, we have to redefine it again. So let me give you some examples related to define and undef here. So I'm gonna clean this here, and what happens here, I'm gonna define object like macro and function like macro here. So basically here I'm gonna define, so pi, which is 3.14, and I'm gonna define so a symbol function type macro called get sum. So get sum, and I pass a and b as a variables, and then I create a plus b. This is macro, object type macro, and then function type macro. So here I'm gonna, so the first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna just print pi, and you will see what happens. So I'm gonna do print pi endl here. So what I'm gonna do, because you see here I defined a simple macro get sum, and then I pass a and b here, but these a and b, they don't have a type, and then here I can define any type here. For example, x1 is equal to 2 int, so y1 is equal to 4, and then so what happens here, I'm gonna do printing here, cout, so get sum, and then pass x1 y1 here, and then return me, so end, sorry for my typing, endl here. So I also will do, for example, another case with double. For example, x2 is equal to, for example, okay, let's say 3.4 and double, so y2 is equal to 5.7, and then cout, so get sum, and then x2 y2, and then what happens here, and l here. Okay, so far so good. And then it will print pi for me, and it will get x1 and x2, it will print 6 for me, and then here, so what happens, and then these are two doubles, and 8, 9.1. okay, so this is the value of pi, 3.14 and 6 for the first case, and then 9.1 for the second case. So as you see, like we define two macros, and then we can use them within our code. Now, so let me give you another example when we can undefine and redefine the same macro. For example, if we want to undefine pi, undef pi. Now I did undef pi. If I want to use, for example, cout here, so to print here, of course, and then let me show you. We will get an error at this line, and then basically this is undefined because I undefined and I cannot use it anymore. And then you will see, and then you will get error like pi was not declared in this scope. Okay. And then so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna define it here, define pi again, for example 4.14, and if I print it, and then it will print 4.14 for me. So 4.14. all right. So and then the same thing we can do with undefining function. Okay, but when we do undefining function, we don't need to pass the arguments for undefined, just to undefine the name of function, function like macro. Okay, now I undefined function, and then now so I can define it again with different definition. Define, for example, get sum. Okay, so a, so I pass a and b, and then so return a plus b, for example +2. Okay, and then here if I print the same thing here, and then it will add 2 to the previous one. Okay, and then it will be 11.1 compared to this one, which was 9.1. all right, so this is like the basic examples about hash defined and hash undefined. The next directives will be conditional inclusion. Sorry, so I will post all of these relevant examples on GitHub's inside of C++ tutorial folder, and the link is somewhere below, and then you can find all of these examples in that tutorial, public tutorial. And but here I'm just like do some sort of cleaning, and then to clean this, because I don't need any of this, I'm gonna keep this part, and then you see the definition here. What I'm gonna do, the next one is called so it's called conditional inclusion. So basically the conditional inclusion comes conditional inclusion is the preprocessor directive that supports conditional compilation of parts of the source code. For example, the conditional inclusion behavior is controlled by these directives. Okay, so here, so basically whatever have we here, these are conditional inclusion, and their properties and behavior controlled by IfDef, IfNdef, else, elif, and endif. Okay, so let's go through all of these cases, and then by some sort of relevant examples. And then what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna create multiple cases here, and then I will provide some sort of relevant examples. And first, okay, let me define something here. Define, so for example, num is equal to 1 here. So I'm gonna define here a num. And the first application is so I'm gonna give you is Ifdef. So hash Ifdef. So if I hit enter, by default it will create endif. Basically, so in C++ we have if and end. Also in MATLAB we have the same thing, if and then so whatever, like the source, and then our code will be like within this if and end. And the same thing happens here, if def. So it means that if define defined do something and endif. So what I'm asking here, if def and num, it means that if number is defined and then format here, so hash if def identifier. Okay, and then what happens here, for example, if number is defined, just print out the number for me, cout. Okay, say num is defined and then val. Okay, and then I just need to pass num here and end l. All right. Okay, and if I run this one, and then of course number is I defined the number here and it will print it, and then we will show it through this example. And what happens, num is defined and value is equal to 1. All right, now so what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna create so else here, so add else. So let's say if we have a case where number is not defined, and we could use else. So if number is not defined and then else, so define num, for example 2. Okay, and then so I'm gonna copy this one, but please you don't do this because it's like it creates sometimes mistakes in when you are working with some sort of complex code. And defining num, okay, and value is equal to something. So here I'm gonna comment this one, and then you will see it will not print this part because num is not defined, and it will go to this part of IfDef, and it will define num is equal to 2, and it will print it for us. Okay, and then that's it. And then another thing we can do also, we can add elif. So we have like elif here. Okay, so before else will be the last part. So if I say, for example, elif, okay, what happens here, for example, if I say num equal to 5, okay, okay, sorry, let me give you another example. I'm gonna copy this, so I'm gonna do the following. Okay, I'm gonna or define or undefine here. So what happens here, I'm gonna undefine here just to give you another application of undef here, undef num. Okay, now I'm gonna use endef with elif. So if endef num, okay, and then endef is equivalent to not defined. And basically we are saying that, so here we are saying that if it is defined, so use this, otherwise define it. And then so another case we could do, if not defined, define it. Okay, so then we could use define, so num 5. Okay, and then so you could print something here, cout. Okay, defining num with IfEndef, and the value is num. Okay, and right, so and also I can use elif here, elif. Okay, for example, let's say I have a case here, if not defined. Elif, for example, if I define num here 2, so I want to see, for example, if num equal to 2, and then do something here, see out, for example, num is equal to and all right. And also here I can use else again. So if none of these, if this is not true, this is not true, and then use else. So else you could do something else. For example, I just make it simple, and then and if not defined, so and not is equal to 2, and then you will have else, okay, and basically num has different value, okay, and I don't need to print the value of num here. And here let's see what happens. Okay, so what happens here, I'm gonna comment this part of the code here using block comments, and here I'm defining num is equal to 1, and now I'm undefining it. Okay, so for sure it will define num is equal to 5, and then you will see this part of the print statement. All right, and then of course you see 5, and then if I comment this part, and then so num is defined, it's not gonna call this part. Num is not equal to 2 because it's equal to 1 here, so it's not gonna call this part, but it will call this part, the else part, and then we can prove this one by running this code. Num has different value, which is the third part of this. Okay, and even okay, if I make num is equal to 2 here, and then what happens, it will print the L if num is equal to this value 2 here. Okay, this is one application of num here. Okay, so here you see I used IfNdef and IfDef. So we could use something equivalent to IfDef and IfNdef. Let me give this one through an example here. Okay, I'm gonna comment this one because I don't need to print multiple lines here. What I'm gonna do here, so I'm gonna give you one example and equivalent to IfNdef. So IfNdef, okay, so instead of IfNdef we could use if not defined, for example num, okay, and then see out num is not defined, and basically this is equivalent to IfNdef num. Exactly, it will do the same thing for us. Okay, and then I can prove it to you, and then by copying and pasting here, and instead of this one I can use this guy here. Okay, IfNdef num is not defined, for example. Okay, let's call this one case 1, and then let's call this one case 2. Okay, and this is it, these are exactly the same code, and then it's just a personal preference, what do you like to do. And then okay, num is defined, and that's why it didn't print it. And then I'm gonna comment this one here, and then you will see it will print case 1 and case 2. Num is not defined for case 1, case 2. And here this is just a personal preference, and but they do exactly the same thing and they are equivalent. You could use if not defined num or IfNdef num. So my personal preference is this one because it makes the coding very simple and clear, but this requires like more complications. And this is one example. Another example which we could use equivalent of Ifdef is equal to if defined. So basically if defined, okay, num IfNdef, and then see out. So let's call this one case 1 num is defined. Okay, and I would, so here I'm gonna make a comment here. So this is equivalent to hash if def num, and here you just need to copy this one and paste this one here, which I'm doing it, and then call it case 2 here, and num is defined. So if I uncomment this part, and then basically num is defined, and then you won't see anything here, but you will see both case 1 and case 2. This if condition and this if condition, they are equivalent, depends on your personal preference. Again, like my personal preference is if def num, because I don't need to reinvent the wheel and then make the code complicated, because I can already use the same feature of if def. Why I should like write a long and complicated code like this? And if I run this one, and then you will see like printing for case 1 and case 2, num is defined, num is defined. Okay, another application of IfNdef, hash define and hash IfNdef, is to avoid repeated inclusion of the same file in a source file or header file, as I mentioned before. This is also called header guards, which is commonly used for wrapping the entire header file of a source code. Basically what happens here, except the first inclusion of the header file in any translation unit, the other files are excluded from compilation when we use some sort of header guards, which I'm going to show you through an example. We will have this discussion about header guards and common mistakes in future video series, but let's focus on simple examples and then how we can use this header guards, and I will also give you advanced examples and to eliminate, for example, long coding. And okay, let's so let me remove this part, because okay, I want to clean it and make it simple here. So what happens here, and basically I want to use header guards because I'm already using hash include. Let's say, for example, I want to see what happens for iStream if I include that one multiple times. So when we use header guards, usually we use IfNdef, define, and IfNdef. Example of this would be like to wrap hash include iStream inside of this header guard. Okay, and then if IfNdef, so io stream h file, and then so I'm gonna cut this one here and put it inside of this wrapper header guard, and then define. So if this is not defined, and then define it, so as it defined. Okay, so here I'm gonna just create some kind of printing macro here, define val, okay, 1. All right, and then you will see if I include this one and which one will print. And then basically this header guard prevents so going inside of this part and to include the IOStream for the second time, because this one is already defined and we are using not IfNdef, which is equivalent to not defined IOStream hy. All right, this is, for example, basically what this says: if so not defined, and this guy here, and then define it, but we already have defined it, and then we don't need to define it again. And then here so let me give you like very simple example here. What happens here if I want to print val here, and then you will see it will always print val is equal to 1, because it will never go inside of this one unless we have like different naming for this one, and then you will see it. Okay, let me, all right, so run this. Okay, it will print 1. But if you see, if I change this file type here, and then you will, of course you will get some sort of error and warning, I would say, and then it will print so val2, because defining val again, and then it's including IOStream 2 times. But usually, like for some sort of like compilers, for example, when you use online C++ compiler, I get this kind of error when I include IOStream 2 times. But here for some reason it doesn't show it. And okay, so anyway, and then I'm gonna remove this one. This is one application for header guard to guard the header files, and then to avoid repeated inclusion of the same file in a source file. And then of course we could, if we use some sort of modern compilers, we can use advanced features of C++ and new version of C++, which is called Pragma. And then Pragma once will do the same thing for us. And then with Pragma once, we don't need to use IfNdef, define, and IfNdef. We just need to include Pragma once. Let me show you an example about application of including the header files and header guards, and then using Pragma once to for code simplifications. And then here I'm gonna clean everything here. The only thing I need to keep it here, include IOStream, and then this guy here, namespace std. What I'm gonna do here, so I'm gonna create 2 separate header files here. So I'm gonna call this one, okay, like I'm gonna call this one sum, and which sum.hpp file. And then what sum file will do for me, and it will get 2 values and returns the sum of one. Okay, int a and int b, 2 integers, and then return so a plus b. Okay, this is one header file, and now I'm gonna create another header file and pass this sum inside of that, and then you will see how. Okay, but don't worry for now, and just here don't worry about the content of the header files. I'm just showing you an example about the application of header guards here. And then here mult, so multiplication, and HPP file here I'm creating, accepting the default case here. What I'm gonna do here, because you see header and mult they are in the same folder, what I'm gonna do here, okay, I'm gonna include hash include, so using quotation marks, sum.hpp. okay, what I'm gonna do here, int get mult, and basically I will pass two integers here, am int b here, and what it will do, return, so 2 times get sum, so whatever it gets from sum, and it will multiply by 2 and return the multiplied values. And then here what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna include the header files of both files inside of my source file, main file. Okay, now you see what happens. Okay, and then of course we will get an error, but you will see what kind of error we will get if we, so if I run this one, all right, if I run this one, and then we will get some sort of error. And what the error says, redefinition of int get sum int. Basically here inside of sum HPP I defined int get sum int a and b and return ab. Okay, and then when I include sum.hpp, what includes does basically takes the content of whatever sum.hpp has and paste it here, and this will be our main.hpp file. And then when I include this guy, so sum hpp and mult hpp inside of this main file, basically it copies this one and then it copies this one here, and we will have duplication of this int get sum inside of main file. All right, that's what is happening. And that's the reason why we usually use header guards here. How? Okay, so, and then let me show you how. Basically, as I mentioned before, and then we will use IfNdef, define, and Ndef. Okay, so IfNdef get some h file, okay, and then put this one inside of this header guard, and then if not is not defined, and define get some h file, okay, and then guard. If this is defined for the first time, and don't define it again here, and then here if I copy this one and then paste this one here and then paste this one here, and when first time when it calls mult function, and it's already defining get sum, and it's not gonna define it inside of main file. And then if we run this our code, and it will be fine, and then so we will not get any error. But to test the code, and then we can do cout, so get mul, so by passing 2 and 2 integers here and endl here, and then so 2 plus 2 is equal to 4 times 2, it should print 8 to us. Okay, so we have 8 here, which is working fine. Okay, this is the header guard I was talking about in the beginning of this video. But as I mentioned before, if we use some sort of modern compilers and advanced features of C++11 or new version of C++, instead of this IfNdef, define, and Ndef, we could simplify the code and header guards only with one line, which is called hash pragma once. Okay, it will do the same exact thing of these 3 lines for us, and then it will wrap this part of the header code inside of this kind of header guard wrapper, and then of course we will not get a problem when we run the code here. So this is like very simple and basic application of Pragma once. And then of course Pragma has another like features, and then if you are interested, please make sure to check out and Google it, and then for advanced C++ implementation. All right, that's it, and I hope you like this video, and then please make sure to subscribe the channel to get notification about upcoming videos, uh, and then make sure, if you like the video, make sure to like it on YouTube, and looking forward to having you in the next video, and have a good one, and bye for now.